see. Well, let me follow that with another question that is similar in that it has to do with the relation between behaviorism and physicalism in the sense of the physiological identification of mental states. Only this one moves to the cognitive arena. Suppose that we had two computers which compute the same arithmetical problems in the same amount of time. So they have exactly this, they're behaviorally identical. But one makes the computations by translating the decimal inputs into binary, doing the computation in binary, and then translating back into decimal and giving you the output as, so that we, in a way that we can read it. The other one does the same thing, except it translates into octal and does the computation in octal. So we have two computers with the same, which are behaviorally identical, but physically speaking, different things are going on inside. Now, mightn't it be that the same could be true for two thinking organisms, either a person and a Martian, or a person, a human and a computer, so that the behavioral net would fail to capture some of the meaningful cognitive states on the inside?
Yes. This was pretty much my point, I think, in the opening pages of Word and Object, in my analogy of the bushes that had been trimmed in the shape of elephants and identical shapes, but random variation in their internal structure. The internal structure would correspond to what was going on in the nervous system, but they've been, our behavior has been whipped into shape by social pressures and trimmed the way these bushes have been trimmed from the outside, equally from the outside. But these are no longer, these internal differences are of course not anything like these enigmatic ones having to do with inverted spectrum. These are differences in the neural mechanism itself. There'll be differences also in the history. One speaker has acquired this aspect of his linguistic behavior earlier than that aspect. His communicant has learned those two aspects the other way around. So, and this brings out the fact that the full explanation of linguistic behavior is not to be found in the behavior, it's to be found in the nervous system. But my point about behaviorism in linguistics is that those further mechanistic explanations, which we certainly want for a full understanding of the situation, are immaterial to the linguistic output, to the study of it as such.
I think many people find it fairly plausible that there should be a correlation between mental states, such as the state of being in pain, and neurological states. But they find it implausible that such states should be identical to one another. The state of being in pain should be exactly the same thing as some neurological state. I wanted to ask you about this. Perhaps one of the things bothering people who have this intuition that the identity, so that an identity theory here would be counterintuitive, is this, that we feel in general that facts of identity aren't susceptible to explanation. So you can't explain why the morning star is identical to the evening star. It is. You simply is. You can't explain why water is H2O. So that if indeed the state of pain were identical to some neurological state, N, say, it wouldn't make sense to ask why these states or events are identical to one another. But, and here's the supposed problem, one would want to ask why it is that this neurologically described state should give rise to this particular feeling rather than some other feeling. Why pain rather than, why does it produce pain rather than happiness, for example? So the question is whether then the fact that a demand for explanation seems to be in order in a case like this, whether that casts any doubt on the identity theory.
The ground for maintaining the identity would be that all observational evidence for the theory, for our overall theory, would remain undisturbed by identifying these, or what comes to the same thing again would, in that respect, that is to say, the evidence would still remain undisturbed. If instead of identifying them, one settled for the neural structures and simply disavowed the mental, or I think it's only a verbal difference whether you're disavowing the mental or whether you're identifying it with the physical. Partly this is of a piece with the more general argument about the indeterminacy of reference, and the way you can shuffle the values of the variables, the denotator, without disturbing the truth values of the sentences or their relation to empirical evidence. That being the case, then mere considerations of economy would count in favor of the step in question. That step in question being, in turn, describable in either of two ways, namely abolition of the mental or physicalization of the mental.
So you don't regard it as an argument against taking this step, that it precludes the possibility of explanation where we feel intuitively some explanation is called for?
Well, it's hard to think what such an explanation would consist in. Once you've, to your satisfaction, worked out the whole neural mechanism behind what subjects report as painful, you have the whole story. From an empirical point of view, what could be added?
What could be added is an explanation for the feeling itself, not as simply an explanation for a person saying, I am now in pain.
Well, now, what about that? That is something that should be subject to explanation. Namely, when the person reports this feeling, when a person says just the sort of thing you've been saying, you've done something physical, and in principle there's something that would admit of explanation in terms of what was going on in your nervous system while you were doing that, and what some of the more remote causes had been in terms of through your previous experiences, which is to say your previous exposures to stimulation.
Thank you.
And that's where I would place that as by way of classifying.
Can I ask something else about this? Is it possible, I agree with you that we do not have any idea of how the physical facts about the brain could explain why it is that a certain brain state feels one way rather than another. We have no idea, but is it possible that at a later date, neuroscientists may have such an idea? That is, the reason we can't imagine how to do this is because we don't have the conceptual apparatus that neuroscientists will one day have. And so, in a way, it's failure of imagination on our part that we can't see how this explanation could go.
What I'm finding difficult is picturing how, when this new revelation comes, or new discovery, new breakthrough, how we would know we had it. How would we know that? Yes, so this is the difference, because actually this person is having the redness sensation where I'm having the green one. I can't picture on what basis we could link any kind of physical discovery with that.